Imagine your 4-year-old daughter repeatedly telling you she talks to an old man in the yard of your new home. You search, but find no one, dismissing it as innocent childhood fantasy. But what if you later discovered this old man wasn't an illusion, but the former owner of the house who died decades ago? Our story begins in 1971, in a remote area of Georgia's lush green forests, where the Andy family, consisting of the father, his wife Liz, and their 4-year-old daughter Heidi, chose to start a new life in their multi-story house surrounded by a spacious yard. This pristine, isolated location was exactly what they sought. A charming view of the trees and fresh, crisp air filling the atmosphere. It seemed like the perfect sanctuary for peace and tranquility, but this calm was not to last. This might seem like the traditional start to every horror movie before things turn upside down. However, everything mentioned in this story consists of documented events where the quiet life of the Andy family transformed into a nightmare of journalistic investigations that haunt them to this day. The family settled into their new home, and little Heidi quickly grew fond of the place. She spent most of her days in the yard, playing with her toys and talking to herself in her own world, being the only child in this quiet corner of the world. This is where the real conflict began, as childhood innocence confronted inexplicable phenomena. On a sunny day in the summer of 1971, while Heidi was absorbed in her play, an unfamiliar elderly man approached her. He quietly greeted her and said, "My name is Mr. Gordy." After a moment of hesitation, Heidi replied with her usual innocence, "My name is Heidi." Her mother didn't hear this conversation directly, but when Heidi told her about it later, she was deeply worried. How could a strange man enter their secluded yard, which was supposed to be completely safe? The area was private to the family, with no one else around. Liz asked her husband Andy to go check. Andy carried his pistol as a precaution and went out into the yard, but he found no trace of the elderly man at all. He thoroughly searched the area, then returned to the house, sternly warning his daughter not to talk to any strangers and asking her to immediately return to the house and tell them if she saw anyone again. Little did the parents know that this warning, important as it was, would be futile against what was to come. What happened next was even more alarming, documented in the family's internal reports later presented to investigators. The situation repeated itself over and over. Heidi would see the old man, greet him, and he would greet her. Then she'd tell her mother. The mother or father would rush out, but find no one. The mother began to doubt. How could an elderly man disappear so quickly without a trace? At this point, concern turned into bewilderment, and doubt began to creep into her mind. As the days passed, the mother began to watch Heidi from the house window, seeing her daughter clearly talking to invisible figures, calling out, "Mr. Gordy." The mother was convinced that Heidi was imagining an imaginary friend, which is common among children at this age. But this conviction began to waver in the face of Heidi's increasingly precise details. Heidi would talk to this imaginary friend daily, describing how he would sit with her and sometimes even push her on the swing. Sometimes the mother would hear Heidi talking loudly in her room, and when she went to check, she'd find no one. At this point, doubt began to powerfully infiltrate her mind, as the details were more than just imagination. The matter culminated one night, specifically in the autumn of 1971, when the family heard violent knocking on the doors. They immediately called the police, and local police records confirmed the family's report. Authorities arrived and searched the entire area, but found no trace of anyone, leading them to record the incident as a false alarm or illusion. The police informed the family that the child might be imagining things, and that the area was completely deserted. But this explanation did not comfort Liz and Andy. Then, a few days later, something happened that made them realize what they were feeling was not just an illusion, but a tangible and terrifying reality. In late 1971, Heidi was playing in the yard as usual, and her mother watched her extend her hand into thin air as if greeting someone, then sit beside them and talk. When her mother asked, Heidi said Mr. Gordy had been there, but he ran away. Her mother severely reprimanded Heidi, asking her not to lie and that this behavior could cause them problems. But Heidi insisted and swore that Mr. Gordy was indeed there. At this point, the mother realized that her daughter wasn't making up stories, but seeing something they couldn't. The mother began to ask Heidi for details about Mr. Gordy, his appearance, his clothes, and if he wore a tie. Strangely, Heidi described him with astonishing accuracy. She even left food for him in the kitchen, only to return and find it gone. At this point, the terrifying threads of truth began to unravel and intertwine with the mystery. One day in early 1972, Liz welcomed the former owner of the house, who came to sign some sales-related papers. While Liz was reviewing the papers, she noticed a signature with the name James Gordy. The lady pointed to the signature and said, "This is Mr. Gordy." Mr. Gordy owned this house, and he had a large real estate company, and he oversaw several schools. He's a good man. Liz asked her if she could describe his appearance, and the elderly woman began to describe him. To her shock, her description exactly matched what Heidi had precisely described. Liz was shocked and said that Mr. Gordy visited her daughter, but they didn't see him when they were there. The former homeowner replied with even greater shock, stammering, "Impossible! Mr. Gordy passed away in 1974. Here, the date of death was given, which was unknown to the family at the beginning of the story. The family, mother, father, and Heidi, froze in complete silence. At this point, all their ideas and beliefs about the nature of what was happening shattered, and they discovered they were facing a terrifying reality unlike anything they had ever known. They didn't believe it. They decided to go to the cemetery themselves to confirm this shocking information. In mid-1972, as soon as they reached the local cemetery, Heidi stopped at a specific grave, without any guidance, and pointed to it, saying, "This is Mr. Gordy." The grave was indeed for James Gordy, with his death date recorded as 1974. How could a 4-year-old child know the grave of a man dead for decades? At this point, terror began to seep into the depths of their souls irreversibly. They returned home and began to seriously consider leaving. Things were no longer normal. They had become an existential threat. They discovered that Mr. Gordy was not just an imagination, but a terrifying reality, and that he was dead. Sometimes they might wish these phenomena were just an illusion, but the truth was even more terrifying. At this point, they realized they were trapped in a real nightmare, from which there was no easy escape. But if Mr. Gordy was real, then everything else Heidi mentioned would be true as well. At this point, Liz remembered the young man, Khan, whom her daughter had spoken about repeatedly. She was filled with deep concern and curiosity about him, driven by a desperate desire to understand what was happening. The next day, Liz and her husband went out to search for this person, following any lead that would guide them to the truth. After a period of searching and checking local records, they discovered that a young man named Khan had passed away in the same area due to a tragic accident in a cotton factory in 1957. He had been dead for 20 years. But what terrified them even more when they thought about it was that if these accounts were true, they were not alone in this house. At this point, they confirmed that their new home is actually the scene of unnatural events beyond their comprehension. The atmosphere in the house became permanently charged and tense. The days passed slowly, which prompted Andy to buy a dog on the hope that it would change their psychological state and calm the house's atmosphere. But just 2 days after the dog arrived, one night in late 1972, while the dog was asleep, it suddenly woke up and went to the kitchen, barking hysterically without anything visible in the place. Andy tried to figure out the problem, but he found nothing at all. He looked at the ceiling. Then the dog ran out of the house like crazy and kept running far away before returning again, terrified and agitated. At this point, they realized that animals also felt the invisible danger surrounding them, which further strengthened their conviction about the presence of hidden entities. After they learned Khan's name and his description matched Heidi's description by 90%, the parents decided to take a set of photos of young people who had died in that area, and Khan was among them. They asked Heidi to point to Khan's photo, and the terrifying thing was that she pointed directly to his picture without any hesitation. At this point, doubt turned into certainty, and they were sure that their daughter saw what they did not. The strange events continued to unfold relentlessly for the family, especially Heidi, for whom the situation evolved into constantly seeing strange entities more clearly. As the days passed, Liz became pregnant with her second daughter, and at this point, things began to worsen even more. The mother saw the house moving on its own, and heard laughter and voices like hallucinations coming from around the house, in addition to objects moving on their own without reason. But this wasn't all. The threat became more physical. One night, specifically in the spring of 1973, Heidi woke up to find scratches on her delicate body. At first, her mother thought she had accidentally hurt herself in her sleep. But the situation became more terrifying when the husband woke up another night and found similar scratches on his back, the same scratches that appeared on Heidi. For 4 consecutive days, Andy would wake up to find wounds on his body in different areas, and strangely, they were not bleeding, and his clothes were completely intact, which ruled out any logical explanation. They had lost hope of finding a natural explanation for what was happening. At this point, they felt completely helpless against these hidden forces that were physically assaulting them. The family could not bear these strange incidents any longer. In the summer of 1973, they decided to contact some psychics to visit their home, trying to find any solution to this nightmare. The first person to visit the house was named Mel. They sat with him, and Heidi told him, "When I'm alone, I see these black shadows." Mel decided to place heat-detecting devices around the house. One night, the temperature in the house dropped significantly, and the devices moved strangely, indicating abnormal activity. Heidi began to see black specters or black shadows, which had no features according to Heidi's description. Mel clearly told them that the house was haunted by ghosts, some of which were peaceful. But unfortunately, Mel did not offer them any radical solution. Instead, he advised them to flee the house immediately. He added with a strong warning, "Your escape from the house will not end the problem, because these spirits will continue to follow you." At this point, they realized that their fate was linked to these entities forever. A few months later, specifically in late 1973, Liz gave birth to her second daughter, Jordan. Heidi noticed that she was seeing Mr. Gordy less often, but she still saw the other terrifying specters, including the ghost of a small girl, which she described as a peaceful ghost. The family continued to suffer, and as Jordan grew and learned to speak, they began to hear her talking and laughing with non-existent people, just as had happened with Heidi. The old scenario had repeated itself with the new generation. At this point, there was no escaping the repetition of the experience, as the spirits were pursuing the entire family. The Garrick family's story spread through local and national media in 1974, becoming rich material for journalistic investigations. One journalist even came to the house to see the ghosts himself, but not only did he find something terrifying, he entertained the idea of living with them to observe their lives directly, which reflects the extent of the terror the family was experiencing. At this point, the horror reached the press, giving the story greater credibility and widespread circulation. Among the people who visited the house, there was a lady named Emel, a well-known spiritual medium who had communicated with the dead since childhood. Emel said when she visited the family in 1975, "I saw 3 people, a man, a woman, and a little girl. They were all black shadows." She added, These shadows were mysterious and very angry. Emil believed that the Georgia forest region had witnessed the deaths of over 2,000 people in unknown incidents over the decades, and cries for help had always been continuously heard for many years. No one had been affected by these phenomena previously, because the harmful spirits were of people who had been killed or kidnapped and died in the same area. Since they were harmful and angry in their lives, they remained harmful even after their death when they became spirits. In the end, Emil advised them to try to be strong and not surrender to these spirits, and to make the spirits fear them. And this is exactly what happened at the beginning. When they started to know the characters and talk to them, they started to be afraid, so the spirits scared them more. Emil told them with a decisive warning, "Leaving this house will not end the problem, for the problem will continue with you and will follow you wherever you go." At this point, they realized they were in an inescapable trap, and this struggle would not end by leaving the house. The family continued to live in the house for a longer period, although the presence of strange invisible entities never stopped bothering them. But they tried to strengthen their faith in the future and coexist with this bitter reality. The strange phenomena began to increase more and more, with repeated scratches, sounds, and random movements. At this point, the struggle became an integral part of their daily lives, and they were in a continuous confrontation with the unknown. In the end, despite all the challenges, Heidi got married and lived in a house far from that area, but she still faces the same strange entities to this day. The entire family, across generations, is forced to coexist with this strangeness to the degree that it has become a part of their lives and a living testimony to inexplicable events.